Hi, folks. Thank you so much for joining us for our event celebrating Elaine Hsieh Chou's Disorientation. Make a little noise for Elaine, please. We're also joined tonight by poet Muriel Leung. Please give it up for Muriel. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'll keep our business brief tonight because this is a special night and I want to get to the heart of the matter as soon as possible. So I will tell you, hi, you are at Green Apple Books on the Park in San Francisco. And hello, everyone joining us online. Thank you so much for doing so. What a gift, what a privilege. Thank you for showing up for these authors and supporting them. Thank you for showing up for Green Apple and supporting us. One way that you can also support us is to please buy books. I am not above asking you to please buy books. If you are able, it supports us as an independent bookstore. You support the authors who put so much work into writing these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part of all. So if you are able to, please do consider purchasing a copy of Disorientation or Imagine Us the Swarm, which are available up at the front register. Please also do keep your masks on between sips of beverages. If you have a beverage, we're trying to move forward as safely as possible with continuing our events, and we want to give our authors the grace to keep their masks off during the event. So thank you for being cool about it. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the folks that you are going to be hearing from this evening. First, directly behind me, I'm so sorry. From Queens, New York, Muriel Leung is the author of Imagine Us the Swarm, Bone Confetti, and Images Seen to Images Felt in collaboration with artist Christine Thompson. She is a recipient of fellowships to Kundiman, Vona, and the Community of Writers, and currently serves as the poetry co-editor of Apogee Journal. Currently, she is an Andrew W. Mellon Humanities in a Digital World Fellow at the University of Southern California, where she's completing her PhD in creative writing and literature. Please do welcome Muriel Leung. And last but most certainly not least, Elaine Hsieh Chou is a Taiwanese American writer from California and a Rona Jaffe Graduate Fellow at NYU and an NYSCA NYFA Fellow. Her short fiction appears in The Normal School, Black Warrior Review, Guernica, Tin House Online, and Plowshares. After living in Taipei and Paris, she is now in New York. Her debut novel, Disorientation, was just released last month, or in March, so still brand new. Sorry, May. And it is also the reason that we are here tonight. So please do join me in welcoming Elaine Hsieh Chou.
Hello everyone. Thank you for coming and thank you for that wonderful intro. So I guess I will read for a little bit. Yes, here we go. I think I'm going to read from a section that's a little farther along in the book, but I don't think it has, spoilers or anything. I think it's safe. This is my friend's book, so let me just quickly find it. But tell me, how's everyone doing tonight?
Everyone's giving a thumbs up.
How come I never can find this? Okay, no. I need to start memorizing exactly which page it's on. This one. Okay, here we go. I found it. Okay, so all you need to know is that Ingrid Yang is a 29-year-old PhD student, and her fiance is a white translator named Stephen. Okay, and she has discovered that all his ex-girlfriends are Asian. The day was, and she's walking around and thinking, okay. The day was balmy and cloudless. Waiting at a stoplight, Ingrid was needled by the realization she was avoiding Stephen. She had never, in all 5 years, ignored his calls. But what was she supposed to say to him? Hello, dear, how's the weather over there? And do you even love me for who I am? Naturally, he knew she was upset, but he attributed it to their combative video chat. He had texted he was sorry. She had drafted a dozen replies before deleting them all. On the one hand, her self-induced panic attack over his 3 ex-girlfriends was ludicrous. Was it fair to bring charges against him for his past relationships? And was his offense, if it could even be called that, serious enough to warrant a breakup? After all, she loved Stephen. She counted on him tremendously. His words and actions had an overwhelming effect on her. Their lives and possessions and habits were inextricably enmeshed, and she felt an intense attachment to him, like she was a non-cancerous growth on his thigh. That was love, wasn't it? Ingrid was physically incapable of picturing the future without also picturing the future of Mr. and Mrs. Green. They would marry, get pre-approved for a mortgage, retire, grow old, die in their sleep, ideally at the exact same time. Like Judith Newman and her husband, they would constitute the quintessential academic couple, a literary translator and a professor. Their personalities, bookish, nitpicky, socially awkward, one and the same. Quiet nights at home spent completing a 3D clown puzzle or enjoying a documentary on the behavior of feral cats. There was a foolproof blueprint for happiness. Ingrid had coveted this future for the two of them, had waited impatiently for it. And now, because of some old photos, she was willing to toss it all out the window. Eunice's words rang in her head. Are you insane? And yet she couldn't expel Alex's declaration from her head either. The sad thing is, Ingrid, you'll never know for sure. How could she know for sure? Like Eunice had explained, something as superficial as taste in food and pop culture was meaningless. This sort of man was becoming craftier. He knew better than to showcase his collection of samurai swords on his bedroom wall, or to advertise his encyclopedic knowledge of 1990s anime on the first date. Like all mammalian predators, he had adapted to his environment. This sort of man could be anywhere. Ingrid glared suspiciously at the white men passing by on the sidewalk. Should she put Stephen through a series of tests, attach him to a polygraph machine while thumbing through photos of women from every conceivable ethnicity, taking note of who made his heart rate quicken? Make him sign a binding legal document prohibiting him from dating another Asian woman should they ever break up, in order to save her the humiliation of being relegated to number 4 on the list. Persuade him to relocate to a country with so few Asians, the odds of him straying from her would be next to none. Poland? North Dakota? Because ever since the 3 Asian ex-girlfriends incident, Ingrid had begun eyeing her fellow Asian woman in an unsettling new way. Here was another one, traipsing down the street while listening to music on earbuds. Ingrid glowered at her, even bared her teeth a little. A month ago, she would have been an unremarkable pedestrian. Today, she was a direct threat to her impending marriage. All her life, Ingrid had dutifully held up white women as the embodiment of beauty, and it follows had compared herself to them. And it follows had come up short. But white woman's elevated position in her hierarchy of beauty had now been unseated. After all, if Stephen had a F word for Asian women, then every single one alive on the planet between the ages of 18 and, say, 62 must be irresistible to him. Since race was the defining pull of attraction, she didn't think individual attractiveness played a major role, since Annie was dowdy and Jenny was plain, and Sandra, Ingrid hated to admit, was more conventionally attractive than herself. But then what was the deciding factor between more than one Asian woman? Was the only way to avoid replacement by another Asian woman to somehow become the ultimate Asian woman? Ingrid froze in the middle of the street. So why had Stephen chosen her? Because she happened to be in the right place at the right time? If he'd met another Asian woman 5 years ago with roughly her same age, education, and prospects, would he have ended up with her? Would he be just as happy? Oh, for fuck's sake, Ingrid cried aloud. Oh, okay, no, let me skip through that part. So her friend Eunice debunks her brother's theory, which is that, okay, according to Eunice, the reason why a couple started dating didn't matter. What mattered was why they stayed together, in which case Stephen had to love her for who she was. He wouldn't date someone for 5 years and propose to her simply because of her ethnicity, would he? And yet, all those times he commented on how cute and small Ingrid was, on how she was his ideal partner, on how he loved her hair, eyes, and skin. What had he been saying, really saying? That if she didn't have her hair, eyes, and skin, he wouldn't love her? And the fact that he'd cycled through 3 Asian women in a row, was he trying to upgrade on the standard model each time? The sad thing is, Ingrid, you'll never know for sure. It was hopeless. If she chose to stay with him, she'd go insane testing him 24/7, trying to figure out definitively and without a doubt that he loved her, not because of what she looked like or what she represented, but because of the part of herself that was incorporeal. Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you.
That's a very great excerpt. So I want to go back to you.
Ooh,
eventually,
okay,
yes.
cool.
Congratulations on this book. Very good you. Can you give a round of applause? First of all, I have to say that when your publicist reached out to me with this book, I thought I had to read the description of the book plot out loud to a friend because I'm also in a PhD program completing my dissertation as we speak. And I said, listen to this 29-year-old PhD student, desperate to finish her dissertation after 4 years of grueling research, has only anxiety and stomach pain to show for her efforts. And then he was like, you have anxiety and you have stomach pain and you're finishing your dissertation. So, and you're way further along, but still, and older. So
That's so uncanny though. That is wild.
it is. But it also like makes it like, I think a lot of reading through this book felt like deeply resonant. And especially I think that passage too. But I wanted to go back a little bit because, you know, this is a book that's set in a setting I think we don't see a lot of, especially with Asian American characters. And I think academia is really hard to write about, but I feel like you got so many inside jokes there that felt like very accessible. I think a lot of people could probably see the same dynamics play out in other kind of work environments. But I also know that you are coming from a PhD experience too. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about how your PhD experience informed the writing of this book and also just the creating and growing the character.
Yeah, thank you, Muriel. That's amazing to hear. So the PhD, yeah, my PhD experience, and I'm a happy dropout. I survived for 2.5 years, and also this was in France. So I feel like for the American PhD program that Ingrid is in, I had to do research and talk to friends and that's how I found out like so many American PhD students are on antidepressants. And I was like, oh, I need to put that in there. But in France, it was quite unrigorous. Am I going to get in trouble? Is like the French government going to come after me? Like, you take that back. But it was honestly, we were just sort of left to our own devices. And it was like, okay, just go write your dissertation now. And it was like, okay. So I was just in the archives, like doing my thing. But this incident that happened that I think did really shape my impression of academia and really made me want to drop out is I gave a seminar on intersectionality, just like, the intersection of race and gender. And it was a small seminar. There were like 7 professors sitting here and some grad students. And anyways, it was chaos. The professors were so angry at me and it became extremely volatile. One male professor, I remember he turned completely red and was pointing his finger literally at me and saying, you are threatening French democracy. We don't recognize race. How dare you say, I just kept trying to say like, well, my experience has been different because I'm Asian and I'm, a woman. And he was just like, shut up. Like, that's not true.
That's true that you're right.
Yeah, it's not true. He was just like, we don't, like in France, you can't say that. And I was just, it was horrifying. I mean, I remember physically shaking because the grad students were all like stunned into silence. And I think they felt too afraid to kind of say anything. But what really broke my heart was I had 2 advisors, and one advisor, the French one, was literally sitting right next to me and joined in. Like, if you have 6 people yelling at you that you are wrong and stupid, like, you would hope maybe the one person that is your advisor would step in and be like, hey, let's calm it down. And also maybe Elaine has a point, but she was like, are you telling me that me and an Indian woman, I don't know why she said that. And she was like, are you telling me we can't even communicate with each other? I was like, what? No, I never said that. Anyways, this ended up being pretty traumatizing. And I was just like crying and trembling. And, when I went home was just, I guess because it was so unexpected, I didn't even go in there with sort of this battle like armor on me. I just thought this will be a nice, pleasant 1 hour, and then it was like an attack has occurred. But this experience just made me feel like, wow, a lot of academia is like lies, is this held up as this bastion of free thought and right protecting the ideas and generally seen as like a liberal haven. And I was like, yeah, there's so many, clearly white supremacy is everywhere, and they really wanted to uphold it in that moment and just be like, intersectionality is not real. Just stop, just completely wouldn't even engage with the idea, was just like, stop talking right now. So that definitely informed just like academia is kind of terrifying.
Yeah, and I think something that you're pointing to, first of all, I'm so sorry that all that happened to you, but I feel like your experience actually like is an experience that many people of color have in academic spaces. And I think like the dynamics that you pointed out too, like it's not just white academics who are joining in on these refusals to talk about race and other social issues. It's a lot more complicated than that. And I think there's a lot of different interracial dynamics that you also explore that's really interesting here in Ingrid's journey. And then also the other thing too is how vulnerable you are as a graduate student, which we get through Ingrid. And we get that in the beginning where she, started off like as someone who's really interested in modernist literature. So she studies, white men and women writing poetry. And but then she kind of gets steered into a direction to write about Asian literature because her mentors think that, oh, you're Asian, so clearly this is fitting for you, and also it's marketable.
Yeah.
And I think that you point to something that's really insidious too about academia, which is it's not just, people think it's just ideas, it's a circulation of ideas. Like what's the harm in that? But I think you're pointing to something like how deeply troubling this can be.
Yeah. And in the publishing world, as I'm sure you've noticed too, like academia and publishing, I feel like, share that in common where you are limited even when you go into sort of very bright-eyed, like I can study anything I want and conquer the world. And then you go in there and you're expected, whether you realize it's happening or not, you are being told and shaped into, this, it makes sense for you to study this. And it was, even in undergrad when I studied English, shout out to my friend Kelly. We met in a Thomas Hardy English class at UC Irvine. But I remember, it was like people would be like, oh, you're studying English? Like it was, I don't know, it was seen as if like I didn't have a right to be there, And then I think also sort of sadly about my younger self, when I took creative writing, I was only writing white characters. I think trying to parrot writers like Raymond Carver and Flannery O'Connor. But then I think now too, I was very defensive and I felt an expectation that I should write like the Joy Luck Club. And so thinking back on it, I'm like, I think I had a chip on my shoulder. I think part of it is, sure, I wanted to aspire to what I was, being shoveled down my throat, was like, this is great literature. But I think another part of me was like, I'm not going to write what you expect just because I'm Asian. What, you think I can't write about two farmers on a North Dakotan wheat farm? I'm going to do exactly that. My teacher ate it up. That's what was funny, is like, I like copied those beats and wow, like just loved it. But a white guy came up to me after class and was like, how did you think of that? It was sort of accusatory, like, how did you write that? And I remember again sort of bristling and being like, what? Like, why can't so I think it's that damned if you do, damned if you don't. It's like, if you write about your culture and your people, like sometimes people will be like, oh, you're pandering, you're trying to like exploit your trauma, your culture, and like make an easy buck or something, or else. But if you are just like, I happen to be really into, I don't know, like 17th century, whatever random, if it's like not specifically about your culture, people are like, wow, you're a sellout. How dare you betray your your people? It's just there's so many expectations. It's so hard to what do we do then? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean this is like actually the kind of bind that Ingrid finds herself in, right? Where, when we get her from the very beginning, she's struggling to write her dissertation, but she also is kind of in like a personal and racial consciousness standstill too, where she's like deeply resentful of this other, Asian American girl like Vivian, who's another PhD student, who's like the post-colonial literature superstar and who seems to have all the right politics, and her and Eunice like hate on her, but then she in her own personal life is experiencing a lot of these kind of navigating these tensions, or the passage you read, or her white translator boyfriend, there's a kind of discomfort in the relationship that she's not able to identify, but there's something about being in her current predicament where she's in academia. There's just like so many parallels that she's making, where she's like, there's this precarity that's part of her field, and then there's this precarity in her personal life, and all this is kind of converging in the topic of her work, which is like inevitably will contend with race, and does. So I just wonder, like, how did you, when you were envisioning Ingrid the character, how did you see her personal journey and her racial social consciousness, kind of mapping out together, and did one come for the other, or how did you conceive of that?
Well, I knew from the very beginning, like my first idea for the novel, it was really about Ingrid's problematic relationship with white men, and how she struggles with her past with them, with her attraction to them, and then I think feeling ashamed and guilty. And so that was always there. And I knew I wanted to write about this very tricky, hard subject. And then I heard, this was in 2015 when I was just sort of, thinking loosely, wasn't writing anything, but that was when I heard about the Michael Derrick Hudson incident. Do you guys remember that in 2015, this white poet couldn't get his poem published and was like, what I'm going to do is become Yi-Fen Chow. And adopted this name and submitted it specifically to diversity like a journal where he wouldn't have been allowed to submit to, and then got it published, and gleefully outed himself to be like, see, the system's rigged against white men, like I proved it, or something like that. But anyways, I was so shocked by this incident. I was so horrified that our identities would be seen as something you could just steal when it profited him for 5 minutes, but we are actually Asian people and live in the world as Asian people, and he just got to be like, this is my former classmate's name that he stole. But anyway, so I was so shocked by that I was like, I must write about it. And in the early version, I was thinking of the novel, Ingrid's a professor, and I was like, okay, well, it makes sense to have her research this writer, right? This poet. And that's sort of how that entered the story. And I knew Ingrid, she would have to confront a lot of these sort of difficult beliefs and memories, and just really look at herself in the mirror. And I realized this incident would be powerful enough, sort of horrifying enough, to kick her out of stasis, right? She begins the novel very status quo, more or less just playing into the model minority myth. And so what happens, the thing that's based off of this incident is so, egregious that she can't look away and run away from those hard questions of identity. And she has to sort of face up to, not to oversimplify things, but kind of there is a fight for justice. And which side will you be on? Will you bat for the white supremacist team? Are you going to be on the side of solidarity for, POC and just our freedom? And she has to make that really, it's hard. I think I speed it up a lot, right? It's sort of 9 months or at one academic year is how the novel unfolds, but she has to think about a lot of these tough things in one year. But yeah, that's how I started out, knowing she she'd had these complicated issues and ideas. And at the end, I wanted her to, if not resolve them, because that's a little too easy, right? To just be like, I'm socially aware now and I go to protests or, I was like, that's a little too easy and pat. But instead to just have her look at those, hard, ugly parts of her past and herself.
Yeah, and I think that the evolution of her journey is really interesting. And I felt when I first read through the book in the beginning, I thought there was a lot of judgment that I passed on her character clearly. And then but I think that there's something about the way the other characters like interact with her and the lessons they learn alongside her too, I think show that I think everyone's on their own like journey to creating a better social consciousness. And a lot of it requires a lot of deep introspective work. And I think for me, I was like, oh, I was reflecting on why I was judging Ingrid so hard. And I was like, I think because I think there was a point in my life when I felt like I was Ingrid, and I think what you do really well on the novel is just I think portraying a shame that feels like very particular to that, like I think a lot of Asian American women go through, and it's not for a white audience. I think it's one that feels like particularly resonant to me. And then I had to ask myself, yeah, good, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, when you're if someone said like this was really hit a white audience, you did something wrong. You're like, oh fuck, really missed the ball on that one. So I love hearing that.
yeah. I mean, I'm sure like other folks like feel the same too. And I would just say like just like because it is like a very particular like shame I felt doesn't mean that other folks like of other racial identities can't also empathize and feel the same or feel different aspects of that shame in their own experiences too. And so I do wonder like in terms of thinking through like psychological evolution of her journey. You said that you didn't want it to be something that was easy. So did she face a lot of obstacles? Is there a point that you think like she needs a break?
I did wonder. I really put her through the ringer and I think sometimes with, oh no, I'm gonna get in trouble if this is recorded. I can't say that. I was just thinking about this book that is, maybe you guys know, that's been described as like tragedy porn for a very well-known novel that came out around 2015. That I remember, and I was working at a bookstore when it came out, and I remember like all we talked about was this book, and I remember feeling for the first time I had this opinion that I think I didn't have before, where I was like, the author has an ethical obligation to their characters, and it has been crossed. The line has been crossed because it's too far, because at a certain point when you hang out with someone enough on the page, they are real to you. And I thought it was cruel. I thought it was cruel to put those characters, especially this one character, through so much pain, like tragedy and pain and suffering one after the other. And so with Ingrid, I think at times I was like, is this too much? Is it because combined with her childhood, she has some hard moments, but I think what made it, I try to balance it out with the good new relationships in her life, like with Eunice. And she does, I think, become, even though it's complicated, friends with Vivian by the end. Like they sort of come to an understanding with each other. And I think she has these moments of levity, especially with Eunice and with her parents. I think that was one relationship I was unwilling to like fuck up, because also, I don't know, do you guys agree that there's just like so much Asian American literature where the parents are like evil, unfeeling, I don't know, robotic, stoic, the list goes on, just right, like tiger parents. And I was like, that I think actually is very inaccurate. And I, like in my experience and with a lot of friends' experiences, like our parents are not all like that. And I wanted Ingrid's parents to be like pretty chill. And so that was one space where I felt was like a wholesome space where Ingrid could find, a real love and connection to them and further like their relationship. So yeah, I try to find ways to balance it out. I did have a reader tell me like, oh, I was incredibly stressed for Ingrid for the entire novel until the epilogue, where not to spoil things, I don't think it's what she like moves back home with her parents, and I feel like we often think that's a sign that you're going backwards, like, oh, how lame, you're like back with your parents when you're 30. And for Ingrid, though, it's like, no, this is actually really healing and wholesome and nurturing. And I think it's the first time you feel, yeah, that she's like safe and you can kind of relax for her a bit. So I try to give her that at the end, but I do put her through the ringer, and I'm not even sure how I feel about that myself.
No, it's just projection. This is what I'm going through right now. That's what's coming across. Not exactly as bad as how Ingrid has it. But yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned her other relationships, because that's something that really stood out for me too. I love that there's as far as like recent books that have come out, there's a lot of like new literature that's examining Asian American women friendships, which Fiona and Jane, like Jin Chen Ho's book came out. And I love that, because we don't see that very often. And I think particularly for Ingrid and Eunice, it's like a very special relationship. And even someone that you would think is like an enemy also becomes a kind of friend in the end. And I think through that like kind of weird mashup of friendships, we do end up talking about this other aspect of Asian American women identity that I think doesn't get talked about, which is like, how do we navigate things like jealousy or comparison, which is like becomes tenfold when it's in an academic space, which is already so competitive and everything's so scarce. Did you want Ingrid to have a best friend who has infinite amount of bobby pins and knows how to pick locks and goes on heists with you? And did you also envision like that there had to be an antagonist in another Asian American woman too, to complicate that?
I think a lot of these decisions, they weren't evident to me, and I had to slowly get there. So like I wrote 3 versions of the novel, unfortunately not 3 drafts. I mean, from scratch, different characters, different plot lines. Don't recommend this. It was grueling, and each time I was like, I have failed as a writer, and I guess that's that. Try to write a book. But the first version, she's older. She's like 49. She's married. She has 2 kids, and that was sort of like a multi-POV, and she was really alone on this journey. And the second version, I wrote in the first person, and that's when I introduced this character named Jeremy Nguyen, who was sort of like an early Alex and Vivian combined, because he was like the really hot activist on campus that they have it, like he thinks she's ridiculous, sort of the way Vivian does, but she has this attraction to him. And I think in the end it ended up being too pat, that like sort of that Mr. Darcy, that relationship where, oh, you fall for like the person you hated the most or whatever. But I think it was finally in the third version where I was like, I created Vivian out of Jeremy. And then, Alex was another spinoff where he was just like there to be hot kind of, and also problematic in some ways, right? With like his dipping his toes into the antiAsian discourse. But then finally Eunice emerged. And what's so funny is when I talk to people and they say like who their favorite character is, often it's Eunice. And I'm so glad that she exists, because afterwards I was like, I can't believe I had Ingrid going through all of this alone. Like she had no one to talk to about this. She just kept so much inside. And I think she needed that close friendship. And it's how I think she keeps her sanity. But Eunice also, she's also very uncomfortable looking at Eunice, because Eunice grew up in a super Asian community, sort of like, you guys know Diamond Bar, Roland Heights, like that part of SoCal, and is totally cool, like has no qualms about her Korean American identity. It's just like very happy, thriving, and loves who she is. And Ingrid, I think, is very thrown by that, and Eunice has this confidence and easygoingness that I think very like unsettles Ingrid a lot. But yeah, sort of Vivian and Eunice emerged out of a lot of trial and error of having Ingrid go through it alone, or having these characters that didn't really work. And so I'm so thankful that they seem to work now, those two. But I loved having, yeah, like different messy Asian women as we are in real life.
Yeah, and I think it well, I mean, it speaks to like I think the satirical part of it. I mean, everyone like no one is perfect in the book, which I think is just accurate, you know. And I think like what's wonderful is that like even characters that you would think would like are stand-ins for like you know like a stand-ins for like a moral good or like whoever is like the social good, like a Vivian, for example. Even there's like there's like places to poke fun at her. For example, her various article titles, which are all very, very aggressively titled. Her politics are very, very clear. But there's also something too that I think enough that we see like a little bit of ourselves in each one. And it's also nice to see that, you know, through the journey, that people make mistakes and people get to make amends. People get to go to silent meditation retreats and come back like totally like a chill like after her breakdown.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know?
She has a mental breakdown for sure. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm
Vivian.
sorry.
Oh, no.
But also relatable. Yeah, I love that. And yeah, I love that there's like, you know, that there, like you said, there gets to be a messy one, like Asian American women character. Like how often do we get that? And I think you mentioned earlier too, the portrayal of, you know, this family dynamic, Asian American family dynamic that often it doesn't get represented in that way. I love the idea that, you know, after everything happened, the parents were just like, we need to rest.
Yeah, and they supported her just working at a minimum wage job, you know. I think, yeah, that's definitely something I've heard from some people. Like I have a friend who, I guess more a friend of a friend, but who works in comedy, and parents have always been so supportive of her because the whole idea was, well, we work so hard so you could be whatever you want. So like, we love this for you. Yeah, it's hard to write. And it's funny, that relationship was almost non-existent in the other drafts. I think I was also just wary of I felt like a pressure to include Ingrid's parents at, like an expectation that if you write an Asian American character, you're obligated to write about family. And so I was very resistant at first and was like, why? Have you guys seen Better Luck Tomorrow, Justin Lin's seminal 2002 film? I highly recommend it for people who haven't seen it. I feel like it's still to this day, 20 years later, probably the only Asian American film that I can kind of relate to at all. Not that I was like, stealing cars or whatever they do, but anyways, that in that movie, I rewatched it recently, and I realized there's not a single Asian parent in it. Not a single one. They're not even mentioned. We don't even see them in passing. And I realized how radical that was. To do that 20 years ago was like, oh, like really pushing against that every story had to look like the Joy Luck Club. And so I think I sort of wanted to be like, have that, Better Luck Tomorrow. So like, I'm not going to parents in mine. But for Ingrid's journey, I did realize eventually, like, okay, she does have a lot to unpack, like when it comes to her childhood. And so much of that was tied to like her parents, and she basically did not treat them very well. And yeah, it's the inverse, right? Like she was the one being like an asshole to them because she was just like, I'm not going to speak Mandarin with you. Like, don't even speak it in front of me anymore. So yeah, these very hurtful things to her parents. But it was something I think I was reluctant to do, but I'm glad that, I think it was meant to be in the book that way.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that it was like her parents who were just like, you didn't want to speak Mandarin. And it was kind of like a revelatory moment for Ingrid, like, oh my God, yeah, I kind of like I have agency in creating like my own struggles right now. I can't just blame it on my upbringing, or, like her parents will like have different, like sense of racial consciousness because of their experiences. And I think you portrayed that really realistically where, there's some things they see and some things they don't. But at the end of the day, they're still very deeply supportive. I will say, this is also very reminiscent of, it's kind of have a similar story to yours with the intersectional pointing.
Oh,
Where at my MFA actually went towards the end. My mother came to my graduation, at which point a lot of people weren't speaking to me for my program, predominantly white program. And we're
their loss.
Thank you. Just, hope this video is recorded so that any of my MFA cohorts
Look at her now.
But there was,
You guys don't have 3 books.
I'm not talking to
Okay.
But there was this moment where I thought, I had all these assumptions about how like, oh, like my mom wouldn't understand what's going on. And, there's been a lot of like protests around like race in the department that I was in, and it was really stressful. And at that point, I just was so ashamed. And I remember telling my mom just like the gloss of it. And she was just, I remember she just said to me, you have to do what you have to do. And then
I know, like I'm giving you permission to throw the brick in the window.
I was telling her, I was like, I'm going to say some shit, and okay, don't look at me differently. And she was just, do what you have to do.
I love that. That's so amazing.
Yeah, and so I think that's like why it's so wonderful to have these portrayals. This is just accurate, I think, to what we experience, even though it's like I think there's something really truthful about that comes out in satire. And I think you hit a lot of notes that are just so resonant. And
oh, thank you for saying that, because people keep just calling the book, and I get it, like they keep saying like it's absurd, and I'm like, yeah, but like pretty much everything has happened, and I sort of try to bake that in with like the notes, because I knew white people would come for me and that they would be like, we would never stoop this low, have some, more confidence in us. And I wanted to be like, I can prove right here in 1980, whatever, like I wanted to have the receipts. Yeah, so I really appreciate you saying that.
I mean, there are some absurd elements too.
There are, yeah. I had to have fun with it.
there is a particular scene that I love. It just I forgot to. I should have reread it and done a heist count, because there were a lot of heists that happened. Like my last question for you is actually, did you do any research on heists to write this book?
Oh, on heists. I'm trying to think. Not really. I think like my version of research is I'll like watch some movies or TV shows and be like, yeah, that seems about right. But like Ingrid at one point breaks into a house, and I try to just really embody how she would do it, which I think is like a very ridiculous way, where there were so many things that were dangerous that she should have done, like a lot more, I think, mapping of like their security cameras, things like that. But she was like, no, what I will focus on are buying surgical footsie, like, how surgeons wear those little funny like shower caps for their feet. She was like, I'm gonna buy those and wear them so my footprints won't be detected. And I was like, oh yeah, that's what she would do. It's just focus on this detail that is, in the greater scheme, there was much bigger things to focus on. But yeah, she's a little silly. But yeah, I wasn't great at sometimes like, I don't know, some novelists I think are like hardcore researchers, but I tend to try and do research in the way that is fun for me. And like in the first version, when Ingrid has children, and I was like, oh, I'm going to research, half Asian, half white children. And that's how I found the Reddit forum, just called Hoppa or Hoppas. And then was like, and then, wow, I found some dark stuff. So that's like my way of research is like, oh, just see what they're saying on Reddit. And I'm just like, oh my God, what am I looking at? And it was like a true rabbit hole where I was just pulled in and was like, oh my God, and it's getting darker and it's getting darker and it leads to this blog and this, yeah. But
thank you for letting us into your research process.
so like, yeah, I feel like unprofessional, like fellow writers don't do my method.
I love it. I mean, it's just like the book has like a mix of all the things like one, it's like a really stirring plot. There's like the absurdity elements, but there's also like a lot of like really deep, meaningful relationships and the interplay of them throughout. And if you hit up some things that are really timely issues like today too, and it also is resonant with I think so many experiences that don't get talked about in this field. And I think even if you're not in academia, I think there's a lot that's relatable here, especially with, you know, like a lot of what is happening now with the uptick in anti-Asian violence. And so I think this book is coming at a time where it feels like very, very important. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And yeah, what's so funny about that is like, you know, when I started writing in 2016, it just goes to show that the anti-Asian hate has, well, it's like in the country's bones, right? Like it really started out with the founding of the country or pillaging, what have you. But yeah, that it's like, oh, it never went away. I think people like to believe like like we're just seeing it now randomly. And it's like, oh no, it's just that we have an opening now where people feel comfortable and they feel like they have a way to express their anti-Asian hate that is literally, you know, 200 years old. So yeah, that's what's kind of sad. But hopefully these things won't be timely in the future, meaning that we will not be suffering.
Yeah, or we'll keep telling, you know, our stories in ways that, you know, like break barriers, and then hopefully like we won't feel so alone in them anymore. At the very least. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a round of applause? Now that I wanted to leave some time for questions for Elaine, and I don't know if Green Apple, did you want to do anything like with index cards, or can I just bring a mic to you?
Yeah, if they want to like raise their hand, the microphone.
Yes, I will pass on the microphone and I will be masked. So does anyone have any questions? I can come to you if you have a question.
Oh, wait,
Or you can just shout it and then you can repeat it. I think that's what.
I will do that.
First of all, thanks for. I was curious whether it seems like both of your experiences with like, I guess, I don't know what to call it, I guess humanities like style graduate programs. Do you think that's kind of like emblematic across like all of those types of programs? Because I have a friend that that's also doing a PhD, but he's doing it on stats and like the entire department is like basically have very few like I guess issues. Stuff happening. So just want
Yeah, thank you. So to repeat the question, your question is based on, you know, our experiences involving, you know, racism and xenophobia in the humanities part of graduate school life in academia, if you feel like it's something that we witness in other fields and other disciplines.
for like across like it's like not unique to like your but it's like
Man, I don't know. sort of like is the question, how deep does white supremacy run even in a sort of raceless field like biochem? Well, I can give you like, I guess a lot of times I don't know the, the big answer, like the truth. And I can give like an anecdote where I've heard of, PhD students in the sciences being like Asian students being called each other's names like constantly. And that's like an example of a microaggression where it's like, you can not be researching race or writing about anything identity related, and you can feel sort of safe in like, I am studying the hard sciences, and then you're like called your friend's name. And one of you's Vietnamese and the other one's Korean. And you're just like, well, and what I've heard is also like, sort of who is like prioritized in terms of who is getting ultimately the funding after the PhD, and that sort of, is it like the random white student that is constantly getting that postdoc fellowship or something? I don't know. I guess I need more like data, but yeah, I hope. Do your friends seem to like it, you were saying, or they don't like it, or?
Yeah, I guess so he's in a program where like his advisor is Chinese.
Well, that's good. I'm glad.
Aside from the
Yeah. Not being the minority obviously makes a big difference.
Yeah, I guess a better way to phrase the question is, do you feel like it's
in MFAs?
MFAs are like humanities style grad school where like minority and something like
I would say yes, from every person I've spoken to. I have not heard of one situation. I've heard good things about Rutgers. I know some POC, because that campus is very like has a lot of POC faculty, and I've heard like better things. But that's every other program that I've talked to anyone has told me like horror stories, and ones that I've read online when I was doing research about where to apply. There was like a Tumblr, an anonymous Tumblr, where a lot of secrets and things were spilled, and it was pretty harrowing. But yeah, I see what you mean now. Thank you.
Here's another question.
Yeah, I'm curious. Thank you again for presenting and for facilitating this panel. I'm curious about, like, as a fellow writer trying to make space for creative practice, how you find moments to take care of yourself when you're writing experiences very close to yours, and ones that can be triggering of things in the past. How do you find moments to take care of yourself in community?
Yeah, so your question's about self-care practices while writing about like hard things in their like creative writing practice. That's a good question.
Yeah, I would love to hear your answer on this too. I think for me specifically with this book, my method was like, satire and humor, which was not intentional. I set out to write a sort of head-on, just serious novel. And then what emerged in the first version was a really snarky, like know-it-all voice that I realized I think I had to put on that voice to precisely, as you were saying, like protect myself and distance myself and feel like I had control over these horrible characters, right? And I don't know. Are you writing anything humorous or? Oh, good. I mean, honestly, because I think humor, the reason so much of what we watch as comedy these days, like when you think about like Fleabag as an example, the reason it's dark is because I think it's more truthful in some ways, right? That like tragedy often has this comedic aspect in it. And I think humor is a way to mitigate what is otherwise too sort of hot to touch. So I think lean into that, and also give yourself breaks, be generous with yourself. And when you're like, I am deeply uncomfortable and I don't want to look at this, you don't have to, right? Or invent a character that is so distant from you, like a Martian or a mermaid, right? And have them go through something, the thing you want to explore. So create as much distance as you need to protect yourself. And also know that you don't owe anyone your trauma. You don't need to sell it. You don't need to show it to anyone. And I think there is so much pressure on us to like dole it out, let other people profit from it. And you don't have to. You can tell them 5% of anything that has ever happened to you. 1%, 0.5, whatever you want. Yeah, I hope that helps in some way. Muriel, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I love what you said. I think that I love the advice of you don't owe anyone your trauma, and I think that's true too. And I think also like when you're writing something that does contend with trauma, as like we might like inevitably do. I think one thing I always think about is just, is this something I would read myself and feel good about at the end of the book? And I think that that helps me like negotiate some of the harder ethical questions of like, well, this is important to talk about, and I don't think there's any way to tiptoe around it. But at the same time, I don't want someone who looks like me or has experienced similar things to finish the book and feel re-traumatized afterwards. So I do think like levity is important. I just finished my dissertation, and at the end of it, I was just like, I think there's something's missing from it. And I think there's just no levity in it. And it's about a lot of hard topics. And I think in going back to it, I would love to, infuse more humor in it. And you always have that option too, which I think is kind of the wonderful thing about being a creative writer, is that you are your own agent in it, and you can do so much. And you can take care of yourself through your writing.
Yeah.
I have a question in the back, and then one over here. Yes, that's you.
Asian Americans are your target audience. Like, given that, how did you actually pitch the book to the publishing company? Since it seems like for the longest time, it was hard to justify business decisions if Asian Americans were going to be the target demographic. Where people said it's a too small community, they understand things like that.
Oh, we should repeat it.
Yeah, the question, or you can also repeat the question.
Oh yeah, it's because the Asian American demographic is seen as quite small, and I guess the American landscape, like how did publishers sort of take that on, or like agree to that? Yeah, what I did was not tell them. So with nonfiction, it's different. You can write like a book proposal and it gets sold that way. But with a novel, everything has to be completed, and an agent sends it out on submission, and so editors just read it. And there's no, as far as I think they include like a little cover letter, but they had never asked me at any point like, who is your audience? I just wrote it that way. And then when the imprint and decided, it was like, oh, cool. I never, it wasn't even until really when the book came out and interviews were happening that came up, and I got to talk about it. But sort of when it was sold, and they didn't even ask. I'm not even sure what they thought, if they read it and thought like, this is totally for me, or I don't know. But that's an interesting thing to reflect on.
I think maybe like a follow-up to that. I think that it's like, do you feel like there's more receptiveness to like Asian American authors writing about Asian American topics and characters these days than 10 years ago? Or do you feel like it's still something that feels fairly illegible to much of the publishing market.
I can't tell. Because it's hard to unpick like what publishing might see as a hot trend from like, oh, or are you just deeply and genuinely interested in sort of opening up our experience? And because I think publishing, it is a business and they want to make a profit. And so it is sort of unsettling to think that they're sort of looking around at like what would sell, what would be like hot. And I think so then it becomes really difficult to, unstitch that from, do you genuinely care, or maybe it's even subconscious, like they will never say that aloud. And they will just be like, we want to amplify Asian American voices and we believe in diversity. And you're just like, okay. It's really hard to say because I don't think truthfully they'll ever admit when it's the case of like, we think this is a hot moment for Asian American literature, but definitely incredible Asian American literature has been around for like years. I think I just wrote like a little sort of blurb about his book, not a new book, but Don Lee's The Collective. Don Lee, I feel like, is really like OG Asian American literature and was writing really, messy Asian American literature, like in characters in the 90s and beyond. But that's tricky.
I'm gonna make a joke about how you'll never know, just like Ingrid is.
I love it.
There's another question.
Yeah. Just want to say, really love this talk. Thanks to you both. My question for Elaine is, I read your essay that you wrote for the cut, what white men say in our absence, and that what led me to discover disorientation. And I thank you so much for writing that essay. I feel like it really articulated a lot of the experiences I felt as an Asian femme, with respect to white men, and it really shook me to my core. And so I was really looking forward to reading Disorientation, and it seemed like a lot more lighthearted, although it does definitely have tackle more darker and sinister topics. I just it was also related to the previous answer, bringing more levity into darker topics. I'm just curious about the sort of, if there's maybe any dichotomy that you've drawn between the shorter essays that you write versus the fiction that you write.
Well, thank you for reading that essay, and that it means a lot to me. And the times that I've honestly sometimes regret, should I say regret? It was hard to write and hard to put out. But then when I hear from someone like you, I'm like, oh, it was worth it. Every piece of hate mail. No, I think the love and just feeling from other Asian femmes, just the response has definitely made it worth it. But it was my first nonfiction piece ever. And I honestly don't think I might have never written an essay in my life if there wasn't this pressure for debut novelists to also become essayists. This is something that happens to every single debut novelist. You're just you can be writing about your monsters and it could be completely, and they're now go write several essays. And I think it'd be really funny if we expected nonfiction writers to write a short story when they debut, to learn this new craft and, but so to me, I think in my fiction, I love to escape. I love to write because I can escape. And and even when it's dark, I think what gets me through it is ultimately I want to write for justice. I want to write for our humanity. And that to me is a cause based around love. And that's what gets me through. And I think with fiction, there's so much room to escape from your head because you're I made these characters up. You know, I literally sat down, gave them a name, decided the foods they're allergic to, decided their pet peeves and how they walk and how they sleep. You get to truly invent someone so you can have that total distance. And so with the essay, I think the reason it's so much darker in tone was I had nowhere to run, nowhere to turn away from how I really felt, which was this primordial fear and helplessness and rage. I couldn't look away from any of that. I couldn't, mitigate that through like a character with like a cool plot twist, which I'm much more comfortable doing and much more comfortable being able to. In fiction, you get to really sort of like cut away, like end scene. And you don't have to go all the way. But with nonfiction, I realized for this to mean anything at all, I have to go all the way, or else like, what is this for? And so and I'll be honest, there's a lot I left out. Also, the original essay is like almost 6,000 words, and the one, word counts are real. So the published version is 2,500. So it's like half basically, yeah. But I will say, yeah, there was still a lot I didn't say because it is just really hard to touch and look straight on at. But yeah, this is why I have so much respect for nonfiction writers because it takes not to call myself courageous or anything, but I think it takes courage. And I'm not sure in terms of like the personal essay, will I ever go there again? I honestly, I don't know. I don't know if I'm that courageous. Yeah, I like hiding behind my little fictional screen. I get to pull that screen right in front of me and just say like, you can't prove anything about me. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that question. Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, one last question.
So I'm curious, since you were doing your PhD in France, was that kind of attitude something that you found in France? Because I guess like it actually wasn't. It didn't actually seem like that surprising to me because I feel like the interactions. I mean, I guess like here, but specifically in France, because they have a very strong fiction, like I was just wondering if you felt like blindsided by like what happened, meant, or was it something that like was like a shocking experience?
Yeah, that version. Yeah. France is deeply racist. America is too. I think they're different in that France's version is a pure colorblind. Like they adhere to the colorblind policy where race actually is banned from the Constitution. You can't say that word. It actually is so repressed that it's a slur. So if you say taras, maybe I shouldn't say that, but it means your race and it just means fuck you. So it's so weird that like literally if you just say race, it's become fuck you. So that's how repressed it is. And I think even though I was starting to learn like just how much France leans in that direction, because I was in an American English department and so much of everything else, because this was a seminar actually on gender, and it was extremely radical in that sense. And we were reading like, Judith Butler. It was like, okay, yeah, they get it. Gender is a construct and all that. But like, I guess I thought that specific space, because they I thought were radical in that sense, that would somehow carry over. I don't know. I think there was definitely a naivete, but also a kind of optimism that like, yeah, I'm getting like people are screaming ni hao at me literally on the streets every day when I go outside. But in this space where, like free thinking is upheld and celebrated, and, we're reading like radical theorists and everything, I guess I held out hope and then was like, oh, I'm sorely mistaken. Like when it comes to gender, I guess transes can be like, okay, but then when you bring up race, they're like, we draw the line. But yeah, I'm sorry if also you had unpleasant experiences in Europe, but yeah, it is an unfortunate thing that a lot of my Asian friends, like when we were living in France, it's hard. It's hard. That's why I gave up free healthcare to move back to this country when, Trump literally had been elected. It was like the start of his term. And I was like, I'm giving up, like, not living in a Trump country and giving up free healthcare and all these other sort of social benefits. Cause I was like, the racism is killing me. It was actually like killing me inside. Yeah, slow death.
And we were like, let's try out the racism in this country.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very, I'm sure it's a very hard decision to make those evils. I don't know why I said last question. I don't have any authority over that. Okay. But Green Apple said that I could. It was the last question. Thank you so much, Elaine, for this conversation. Can we get one last round of applause?
Thank you, Muriel, and thank you, everyone at Green Apple. Thank you so much.
I believe that there are books for sale up front. So if you would like to get a signed copy of Elaine's book, please support your local independent bookstore and get a copy. And I believe you can come here and say hello and get your book signed, which would be really, really sweet. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, everyone.